G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the Emperor's Children model range. So this is all obviously Forge World and, well, Australian dollars, so don't be too freaked out if you're in America. Our dollars are, well, they're worth a different value to yours, but also Games Workshop has a very, how should we say, favourable exchange rate that they've decided upon. So yeah, keep that in the back of your mind. Anyway, let's kick it off with the original Emperor's Children Mark IV upgrade heads. I have never liked these heads. Possibly for the fact that they are just all 100% identical, the exact same head. I think they needed a little bit of something to differentiate them. Yes, there is the ponytail, crest, whatever you want to call it, that you can glue onto one of the helmets to turn it into like a sergeant's helmet. But on the whole, not the biggest fan in the world of this lot of heads. And the other thing it falls into is a trap that all of these first-gen heads pretty much fell into, which is you only get 9 helmets. You get 9 helmets, and you get one blank, well, not blank, it's just a head with no helmet. And not everyone wants that, especially those who are more practically minded and feel that everyone should have a helmet on because helmets are smart to wear in combat. Yeah, not the greatest. So not a huge fan of this set, especially when we have other gorgeous helmets that we'll see later on in the form of the Palatine Blades. So next up on the list is the Emperor's Children Mark VI heads, and I think the Sergeant head looks fantastic here. Is definitely a better version of the previous helmets. But the beaky helmets, I think the just flat gold piece of trim is really boring design. There are so many things they probably could have tried, and instead what they came up with is very bland and unimaginative. Yes, it is a beaky and that is great, but they could have done something like added in a little bit of like a sonic shrieker into maybe the sides, each side of the beaky grill or something. But yeah, they're just, I think for the Emperor's Children, apart from this one helmet for the Sergeant, they're not very good. And if I was going to use the original helmets, I would probably be more in favour of using those than these ones. I would just intersperse them throughout the force, just the occasional person with them, maybe even just the Sergeants in the squads to really note that they're Emperor's Children. So next one along is their Phoenix Spears. So these are their unique Legion weapon. And it's great to see them, but why is it only the spears? There are multiple types of Phoenix weapons available, and even things like charnable sabers and such, and I suppose there were other weapon types, but they're all Mark IV arms. They're very much a hangover from a period in Heresy 1.0. And funny enough, the blue tack that holds these still in place is stuck behind a few of the hands. They didn't Photoshop it out. Has nothing to do with the quality of the parts, but I think it's just funny. But yeah, they're nice weapons. These are gorgeous. And in fact, these Phoenix Blades here, these Phoenix Spears, for both the Power Armor and Terminator Armored ones, because you can see the Terminator one, second in from the left, is a much larger blade with a much larger fist. They actually look nicer than some of the weapons sculpted on the Legion Praetors, which we will, of course, get to. Next up is the Contemptor Dreadnought. Now, this is actually a pretty nice Dreadnought. It's nowhere near the top of the Dreadnoughts list. In fact, I think it's one of the worst Legion Contemptor Dreadnoughts, but it is by far not an ugly Dreadnought. So, I really like it. The problem is, of course, that it had a really high bar that it actually had to live up to, and that sort of sucks in the long run. Compared to the other Dreadnoughts, but it is by far not an ugly Dreadnought. The only downside here is that this particular Dreadnought is a case of a very, very blinged out Dreadnought torso, which now has to go onto a very, very boring, flat, bland plastic Dreadnought body, and it's too much of a hard shift from one to the other. Yeah. Alright, from there we get to the Emperor's Children Palatine Blades. These miniatures are gorgeous. These are some of the first miniatures released in Heresy 1, and I think they really hold up. And you can see in the design of the different Mark IV helmets, there is a lot of differences here, a lot of diversity in the styling, the artistic look to them. They're fantastic. The choice of filigree and the flat faces on the helmets. as well as the things like the little leather straps, the gold trim and embellishments around the armor, and of course no one can look past the blades themselves. Just a very iconic design, that almost falchion style blade or katana style blade, but just with that little bit of a leafing effect to the end of it. Really lovely designs, and yeah, they hold up. The only thing they suffer from is something that all of these early Heresy sculpts suffer from, which is the scale creep of the system. Over time, Games Workshop has consistently increased the scale on miniatures, and unfortunately the Palatine Blades suffer from that more than many others do. It is what it is, okay? Next up, of course, the Phoenix Terminators. Now, Phoenix Terminators are possibly some of the most gorgeous sculpts in all of the Horus Heresy, perfectly emblematic of their Legion, and it goes to show what you can do with an almost identical sculpt, and it is an almost identical sculpt. There are very few subtle differences between the members of this unit, but due to the posing and the different options available to them for that posing, like you can put any of these parts on any of these models. It's not like new kits where it's you must put this set of arms on this body, you must put this head in this pose. No, every one of these miniatures, the top torso is a different component to the legs. The arms are a different component. The spears are a separate part that attaches at that wrist. The only ones who match up are the ones with the two-handed weapons, and even then you can put those two-handed weapons onto any particular body you feel like. This is so much more improved than many modern sculpts, and this was all hand sculpted. And they also have some of the finest details that we see in the entire Heresy range. So I really have to appreciate them on that level, and I think you should too. These are just gorgeous miniatures to this day, and in fact, I think these are better sculpts than the Legion Praetors. And if I was going to be using these miniatures, I would use them not just to create Phoenix Terminators, but to create command squads. By simply changing the hands, you can easily turn them into another type of Terminator, or by doing some other conversions to them, take the helmet out, put a bare head in there, maybe put a standard on the back of them, something like that, turn them into a Legion Praetor. These are beautiful models for it, and they work so well. Gorgeous, love them. Chef's Kiss. Speaking of Chef's Kiss, the Cacophony are the only unit outside of maybe the Gal Vorbak, which is showing the slow descent of the traders into chaos worship. And these are from Book 2. These guys are present at Isfahan 5. And they are that beautiful combination of, you can see that they're heading towards being Chaos Space Marines, but they're not there yet. They're still very recognizably in Mark 4, but with weird augmetics. They've got more gold trim starting to creep into the armor scheme. The Mark 4 helmets on them are being perverted. You can see the bare heads, the augmetics that are being performed on them. Of course, the different little speakers and such on these guys, where they've just drilled out all the existing voxes and put other stuff into them. And again, hand sculpted. And they are perfect. This is something that is really disappointing about the later Heresy books, just as a quick aside, is that they don't take the time they haven't taken the time over at Games Workshop to make very late Heresy units. They talk to us about how, this is a late Horus Heresy book, the traders are going full chaos, but then we're provided with kits which are indistinguishable from miniatures that would be used in the Great Crusade. I just think it's such a poor juxtaposition for the setting. These miniatures, though, are perfect for emphasizing that point. And they say to you, like, hey, there is something wrong here. These are clearly perverted versions of what came before. And I love the Cacophony. But anyway, now we're going to get into something a little more controversial, and that is the Legion Praetors. They are not bad sculpts. That's the first thing I want to say. However, it is hard to fall in love with them when they have come after the previous sculpts. Because if you compare the Palatine Blades, the Legion Praetor, Yeah, the Palatine Blades are so much superior in style. Part of that has to do with the way that the gold trim is utilised. If we go and we look at something like the Palatine Blades, everywhere the gold trim is used on them, it is used in very specific ways. The gold trim forms little filigree. It's not just a curved piece of gold, it's gold that loops back and forth in the pattern almost like vines or a fleur-de-lis symbol, for example. And you see it on the knees here, the way that the gold comes out, same as on the chest and the Palatine quillers on the chest, versus, say, this guy where the gold is just that. It's just a swirl. It's just a single tick, a single curve. The only swirl that's sort of semi-correct is this one here on the cloak. None of it on the torso is quite right. And you do kind of notice it. And on top of that, look at the chunkiness of the Phoenix Spear or Phoenix Weapon, Halberd, whatever you want to call that, comparatively to the other sculpts. It's really bad. And this is not necessarily the fault of the sculptor, because the sculptor may be limited by things like casting techniques. Forge World may have said, look, it is really hard to cast the old Phoenix Spears and Charnable Sabers on like the Palatine Blades or the Phoenix Terminators. They're just so thin, they're so fragile, we want to go a little bit thicker. It'll be cast a little bit easier, be more sturdy for the player. That could be the reason behind it. But there is one part on this miniature, and only one part, that I just adore, and that is this head. The head is fantastic. It is better, I think, than many of the old Cacophony. Just the way that the jaw is sort of distended and the Vox grill placed into his face, and the paint job really helps emphasize that. It's just sort of a bit red, a bit purple around it, like it's slightly infected, and as well as the purplish Slaneshi colours in the skin. I just think that's a bit of visual storytelling there. There is also a helmet available to us. It's okay. It's a Mark 6 helmet, but it's actually less impressive than the Mark 6 helmet found in the original squad. So that's a bit of a downside. And another weird quirk of this miniature is the rivets on the leg. They're unlike any other rivets we've seen. They're really tiny and there's a lot of them. And I don't know how I feel about that. I just think it's a little bit mismatched. When I see this miniature, and I have seen it in person a couple of times, I feel like it looks to me more like when someone has tried to make an STL or make a copy of a Games Workshop miniature, something in the style of Games Workshop, like a Cyborg Miniatures, or like an Artel, like a War Games exclusive, one of these other brands. And it's like, yeah, it's similar. Like you can see it's got some sort of similar heritage, but it's not quite right. That's how I feel about this miniature. And all of those arguments translate perfectly across to this miniature. Because, well, they got one thing right on this. Maybe two. I kind of like the Combi Bolter. But the thing they got right on this was the gold trim, the little squiggles of filigree, like around the shins here. They're pretty close to what we saw in the old Phoenix Terminators. The problem is, you look at this fat, chonky sculpt, and you compare that back to something like the Phoenix Terminators. They're both in Tartarus armor, which, by the way, is great. I love Legions where the Praetors and the Elite Terminators are in the same type of armor. That is ideal. You don't want a situation like the, I think, Blood Angels, for example, where it's like your Legion Terminators don't work with the Legion Praetor. That always sucks. But in this case, it is just an inferior miniature compared to those Terminators. I would rather take an extra Phoenix Terminator, especially for the cost, $75 here, or I can spend double that and get 5 guys instead of, 2 for that price, and I can turn this into 5 different Terminator armored consoles, or make a bigger Phoenix squad, or give one of these guys a Legion banner and turn them into a command squad. Like, there are so many things I can do here. This is awesome. This is not. And I'd be very curious to see how many people have actually bought this miniature. And again, no hate on the sculptor. He seems like a really nice person too, the person who sculpted this, and I have had the pleasure of having a quick little chat with him. This is someone who's passionate about their work, and they've been assigned the job to do, and they did it. So, no hate on them at all. I just really want to stress that point. It's just, it sucks having to follow up someone else's work on this range when the other person is already absolutely knocked out of the park. Like, it's unfair to the sculptor who's chasing that, especially when they don't know the secrets behind the original sculpt, and they're also got to stick to some corporate mandate which says you will do it this way. Anyway, going on from there, we get to Idlewon, who is one of the OG goats of the heresy, and Idlewon is a near-perfect miniature? Not quite, though. He is from that time when the bases started to get really out of control for characters. This is the book 2/3 era, where characters start to get just bigger and bigger and more ludicrous bases, which I think finally capped out with Perturabo. It was kind of tolerable on Horus, and but by the time we got to Perturabo, because Horus is the War Master, Perturabo is on like half a knight torso. Sigismund's standing on the corner of a Sicaran battle tank. Some of these bases were getting pretty out of control, and Idlewon is no exception. He's got most of a Derridero Dreadnought on there. I mean, that's pretty excessive, I think we can all safely say. But apart from maybe the Skrillex hair, which means you are sort of limited on the posability of this miniature, like the head must sort of sit a certain way because of the way the hair has to overlap the armor plate, I really like it. The inclusion of the Sonic Shriekers into the backpack is a masterstroke, especially on this jump pack, and the hammer is gorgeous. This is a weapon I think should be sold as an individual component or a variant of it, and should be made its own weapon class for the Emperor's Children. Call it the Phoenix Maul or the Phoenix Thunderhammer. And it should be a strikes at initiative hammer if you charge. Like, yes, that's strong, but hey, people have got to pay the points for it. So, yeah, but what a gorgeous weapon. Like, they actually made a hammer look really, really elegant in Warhammer, where the hammers are always these gigantic, clunky, ugly-looking things. Like, even Forgebreaker is a very large and clunky-looking weapon. This looks more elegant than Forgebreaker. And it's great. The shoulders, like, they have a lot going on, but in this miniature, it feels like you can have a lot going on because it is Idlewon. He is so over the top that people comment about how over the top he is as a character, because I think he's a bit of an idiot. And frankly, at times he is, but they did still find spaces to leave blank canvases, like on the shins, the upper thighs, even the arms have a little bit of gold filigree, but that's about it. And they resisted the temptation to cover the backpack in filigree. So it's pretty much a masterclass in what is the absolute upper limit of what you can put onto a miniature, I think, while still maintaining a tasteful miniature. I believe there is also a helmet option that is included, which is not bad either. And I quite like it, and I wish that this was the helmet type that was available for more people. Obviously, it doesn't need the sort of horsehair crest coming out the top, which I think looks gorgeous again. But just the helmet itself with the little Vox grills either side of the muzzle of the helmet, to the left and right, those things look fantastic. Like, it's just a beautiful incorporation of like the 40k Sonic Shriekers aesthetic into a 30k miniature. And it's a surprisingly convertible model as well for Emperor's Children to make other characters out of. So, yep, love it. Absolutely adore Idlewon of the Emperor's Children. Then we get to Saul Tarbitz. And Saul Tarbitz is... he's an OG of the Heresy and a beloved character, which is great. Although he does look like Sylvester Stallone with blonde hair. I have very mixed feelings about Saul Tarbitz's miniature. In many ways, he is more busy than Idlewon, and his character is a lot less of a showboaty character than most Emperor's Children. He's probably the most down-to-earth of Emperor's Children, maybe along with, say, Solomon Demeter. But then you've got the sword. Now, the sword, the blade works for me, the grip works for me, but the two together do not work for me. Something about that crossguard doesn't look right. I think it needed more of like a rapier style hilt or a more similar hilt. It just seems like that crossguard just gets in the way of the user when they're trying to grip the haft of the blade, when they're trying to, this looks like it's going to impact with his hand, with his forearm in some capacity. I never quite understood that design choice. The sniper weapon is fine. The specialist bolt gun he has, I like the way it's sort of just slung in there, although it is sort of molded in with that cloak, which is makes conversion and things like that a little bit more difficult. But overall, I do think it is a good model. It is a nice miniature. I don't hate it. The helmet is perfectly serviceable. Yeah, I would give it a pass. I'd say he's actually a solid basis for many character conversions. It's a nice enough miniature. It just suffers from a few of the modern aesthetic choices. Then we get to Lucius, and Lucius looks like a Cadbury chocolate bar, which is a brand here in Australia of chocolates, maybe globally. I'm not super familiar with international chocolate sales, but just the swirls and curls of gold on his chest is just like in the advertising you would see for a Cadbury's chocolate bar. The gold swirls on the purple. Again, it looks nothing like the previous ones we've seen. But how do I think he looks as a character? Well, I think he looks pretty good. I do have some little quibbles, like his blade of the Lear is completely different to when it's wielded by Fulgrim. Different handguard. The only thing that's sort of, it's similar blade shape, that sort of Kopesh blade shape is the same, but this whole rapier basket hilt around the hand, that's, no, Fulgrim doesn't have that. He has that very Slaneshi guard, as you'll see in a second, because I'll show it now. The grip and guard on the sword and the styling is very much nicer on Fulgrim than it is on Lucius. So again, it's the inferior copy. But I like the inclusion of things like the little leather straps. I think they're a pointless inclusion around the waist, but I do like them because it sort of leans into the bondage a little bit, which is, as we know, where he's going to end up. I don't know how I feel about the cloak, though. Lucius is very practical, and I don't remember any description of him using a cloak, because I think it just gets in the way. Lucius is all about his speed, his agility, his fighting, and his pride. Why would he risk losing a fight just because of that? It just seems a bit silly, and I think it would have looked better without the cloak, or at least having the cloak as a very deliberate option, not as a you must take it because we've molded it into his shoulder pads and that sort of thing. I don't appreciate that part of the miniature. The head looks great, much nicer than 40k's Lucius, but of course 40k's Lucius is a 10-year-old sculpt. And the helmet is pretty questionable. I'm not a big fan of the helmet. So, yeah, it's probably the worst of the characters' helmets by a fair margin. And I guess that takes us into Fulgrim. So Fulgrim is a miniature that many people dislike as a Primarch, and there was an alternative version of him where we can see there's a banner on his base, this beautiful Emperor's Children banner part on the base, which can be used to make a gorgeous Emperor's Children Vexilia or Legion banner, by the way, if you have this model spare and you don't glue it onto the base, which is very easy to do without ruining the base. That was originally held in his right hand. He was not holding the blade of the Lear, I don't think. I think he had a banner pole that he was holding in this sort of similar pose to this, and that was the banner atop it. And then they changed it to this design. I actually love this design, and Fulgrim, after having handled it and painted it, is actually one of my favourite Primarchs. I bought a original Fulgrim from Forge World back when he first came out. In fact, I bought every single Primarch from Forge World. I have every single one of them. They're all painted, except I haven't finished the line, and I haven't built and painted Jagged Eye Khan yet. But I will have it done, hopefully by Christmas. And I got a second Fulgrim from Uncle Mao, and I did that because I wanted his gloved hand so I could take the Emperor's Sword off Guilliman and convert it onto that hand in order to create a Fireblade, which is Fulgrim's other weapon that he uses. It was always the preferred weapon of choice because it was so much better than the Blade of the Leer in Heresy 1, and it also looks cool as shit having a giant flaming sword in Fulgrim's hand. But yeah, I really like this model. Is he the best of the Primarchs? No, and realistically, I mean, he's beautifully sculpted, but they all are. He is probably in the lower end of the Primarchs for how beautiful he is. There are so many good Primarchs, though. Like, you have to understand that vying for the top positions is very difficult. And some Primarchs have absolutely nailed their aesthetic. Fulgrim's not one of them necessarily. He looks gorgeous to me personally, but I understand how other people feel about it, and I do see the problems in there. There are some quirks to his design, and it really is just designed to work on that. It was released in a 2-part sort of set you could buy for a time there. There was a bundle where he had a base that actually joined in with Ferrus Manus's base, and the two interlocked with one another to create a duel or a dueling scene, which of course is no longer sold, but I might be able to find a picture of it to put into this video. Anyway, yeah, so that's the Emperor's Children for me. The range is gorgeous to give them marks as a whole. However, the Praetors, the Terminator one, I think is almost an unsalvageable miniature for the Emperor's Children. The Power Armored one, I think, cut off his Phoenix weapon and give him another Phoenix weapon, and he might be made to work, but the bare head definitely works. The Palatine Blades, all that are gorgeous. The only other area they really fall down on is the 2 Praetors and the helmets. The helmets all leave something to be desired. But apart from that, this is one of the most solid ranges in the Heresy, especially those early elite units like the Palatine Blades and Phoenix Terminators. They're just, everyone wants to use them, and, well, they're just gorgeous. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching the episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.